Deep in the Pacific Ocean, there's this giant climate cauldron, a heat engine so powerful it can change the weather halfway across the world. And according to some pretty startling new research, it might be about to boil over in a way that could change our world not just for a season, but for good.
So that's the big question we're digging into, right? Can a temporary event permanently change our climate? It sounds like something out of a movie, but it's a possibility that climate scientists are taking very, very seriously. And at the heart of it all is a single number, a real line in the sand.
1.5 degrees Celsius. You've probably heard this number. It's the warming limit that scientists and big international agreements have pointed to as a major tipping point, a point where we risk setting off irreversible impacts on our planet, and a powerful weather event could be just the thing to shove us right over that edge.
Okay, so let's get into it. How on earth can a temporary pulse of heat from the ocean create a permanent problem for the entire globe? Well, to get that, you first need to understand the main character in this whole story. Meet El Nino. You've definitely heard the name, but think of it like this. It's one of the planet's biggest, most natural release valves for heat that's stored up in the ocean. All that energy has to go somewhere, and El Nino is basically the Pacific Ocean's way of letting off a whole lot of steam. So how does this giant heat engine actually work?
It's really a four-step process. First, an incredible amount of heat builds up in the ocean over by Indonesia and Australia. Then the winds and currents change. That shift allows this huge pool of warm water to just surge eastward across the Pacific. And finally, all that heat and moisture gets vented up into the atmosphere, kind of like a planetary exhaust system. And that changes everything.
And the effects are truly global. This one event can reroute the jet stream, it can temporarily raise the entire planet's temperature, devastate coral reefs and fisheries, and at the same time, it can deliver catastrophic floods to one continent while fueling historic droughts and wildfires on another. It's an incredibly powerful, interconnected system.
But here's the crucial part, and this is where it gets really interesting. Not all El Niños are the same. Every so often, the conditions line up just right to create something way more powerful, something scientists have started calling a super El Niño.
And these are rare. We're talking really rare. We only have 3 on record. Each one had absolutely massive global impacts, and the last one, back in 2015, actually helped push the global average temperature permanently past 1 degree Celsius of warming. So what exactly makes one of these things super?
So the scientific definition here is actually more telling than it sounds. 2 standard deviations above normal. Look, that's just statistician speak for something that is way, way outside the norm. It's not just a little fluctuation, it's a huge systemic warning sign, an event so far outside the bounds of normal that it tells you the whole system is getting a major shock.
And these shocks, they're getting bigger. The climate scientist James Hansen projects that in the world we live in now, which is already warmer, even a moderately strong El Niño could temporarily push global temperatures all the way to 1.7 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. But the most alarming discovery isn't just about a temporary temperature spike.
It's about something far more permanent. And this brings us to the really shocking discovery from a recent study. The idea of a climate regime shift. This is the whole ballgame. This is where a temporary shock can cause lasting, permanent change.
So a regime shift is basically when a region's climate, or its ecosystem, doesn't just bounce back after a big shock like a super El Niño. Instead, it gets shoved into a new, different, and this is the key word, persistent state. The old rules just don't apply anymore. And this chart just brilliantly illustrates the difference. On the left, you've got the temporary impacts we're used to. On the right, the permanent shift. So we're not just talking about a temporary drought in the Amazon, we're talking about the entire Amazon flipping from absorbing carbon to releasing it for years. It's not just a brief marine heat wave, it's permanent damage to coral reefs. It's not a single bad year for crops, it's soil moisture staying dangerously low for season after season, threatening food security. See the difference?
And get this isn't just happening in 1 or 2 places. The research found these regime shift hotspots all over the globe. The Amazon, East Africa, Central Australia, a whole bunch of places where super El Niños have already triggered these long-lasting shifts. It's a pattern that's connecting oceans and continents in a new and frankly alarming way.
Which brings us to the human challenge in all this. What does it mean to live in a world where the basic climate rules are changing right under our feet?
How are we supposed to adapt to a new normal that's often a lot more hostile?
Well, researchers have identified what they call a vicious cycle. Part 1 is this. Our already warming planet makes the impacts of a super El Niño, all those droughts and floods and heat, even more intense than they would have been otherwise.
And here's the second half of that nasty cycle. Those supercharged events then trigger these permanent regime shifts, which can literally lock parts of the climate system into an even hotter or drier or wetter state. So global warming makes El Niño worse, and then a worse El Niño turns around and accelerates the long-term effects of global warming.
This dangerous feedback loop is making something the United Nations calls the adaptation gap even wider. That's basically the growing space between what we know the risks are and how prepared we actually are to face them. The challenge isn't just dealing with a single bad year anymore. It's about preparing for a fundamental change in how our world works.
And that leaves us with this pretty profound question, doesn't it? When temporary events can trigger permanent changes, our whole approach has to shift. We can't just react anymore. It forces us to ask, how do we prepare for a future where the old, familiar normal might just be gone for good?